Hello again, my lovelies, and welcome to another instalment of Through the Eyes of Enji, where we're trying to look at 101 films over 365 days, raising money for We Are With You and the Shawbury Village Players. Now, We Are With You Shropshire is a confidential service for young people and families affected by drugs and alcohol in Shropshire. Their work includes information, support and advice about drugs and alcohol, one-to-one support, group work, a parent-carer helpline, help to make decisions about lifestyle, links to other services, early intervention, and harm reduction. Now, if you've known me for any particular period of time, you are probably aware of the Shawbury Village Players. Shawbury Village Players are a community theatre group operating out of, surprisingly enough, Shawbury. We put on murder mysteries, we put on pantomimes, we put on Shakespeare, we put on pretty much anything you can think of. Whatever it is, we're likely to give it a go. Now, if you have struggled with your mental health in the past, like I have, then you might appreciate how devastating it would be for us to lose a group like the Shawbury Village Players. So, dig into your pockets, give us a couple of quid. We are 87% of the way there, still. And we still need about 30 odd films to complete the 101. So please, donate, nominate some films. Don't make me pick some, because you don't want to hear me talk about Fellowship of the Ring for 40 minutes. Just like you probably don't want to hear me talk about High School Musical 2. Because I don't want to watch High School Musical 2 ever again. So, High School Musical 2, released in 2007, directed by Kenny Ortega, written by Peter Barsocchini. It stars Zac Efron as Troy, Vanessa Hudgens as Gabriella, Ashley Tisdale as Sharpie, Lucas Grabeel as Ryan, and Corbin Bleu as Chad. School's out for summer and the East High Wildcats are ready to make it the time of their lives after landing jobs in a wealthy country club owned by Sharpay and Ryan's family. Now, normally I would probably insert the usual "if you like the first one, then you'll like this one" line. But come to think of it, that's not entirely true. And I'll try my best to explain why. You see, I think this is the film where Disney realised the size of the hit they had on their hands. So this time, Zac Efron's singing all of his own lines, over-talented bugger that he is. And I kind of have to look at the information that I read about before actually watching the film that made me really painfully aware of how much effort was going to be poured into this one. I saw that the songs were written and rewritten again. That there's a piano used in the film towards the finale, which cost $25,000. So this is definitely a much slicker production than the original, which I remember at the time watching it thinking that it had a bit of an amateur feel to it. And even the opening of this film, which opens on empty rooms across the school from the first one, still had that amateur theatre vibe, but that vibe melted away roughly about 8 seconds later as we break into the opening number, which feels like everyone riding high on the success of the first film. And it introduces the various characters from the first one and reminds us of their basic traits. Laura actually caught me tapping my foot to the first one, and I was, it's a pretty. I thought, this number's pretty well put together. The choreography is as sharp as ever, and I just kind of settled myself in, thinking, oh, this is only going to be like an hour and 20 minutes. I'm not going to lose it. I'm not going to feel like this is a waste of life at all. But once the plot of the film really gets going, and we've got all these perfectly well-dressed teenagers who live in big houses with probably large bedrooms, worrying about college money, I started disconnecting with the film, as I found that these characters that we follow through the film and that the film encourages us to care about are either ridiculously arrogant and self-obsessed. I'm looking at you once, Troy. I'm looking at you about a dozen times, Sharpay. Or they're just painfully stupid and really kind of clueless. Looking straight at you, Gabriella. The characters are forced sideways into this rags versus riches story that doesn't really fit the tone of what this series appeared to be going for. And whilst you might cry at me that it's just a kids' film, and it's only a Disney Channel straight-to-video job. I would like to remind you that this is Disney we're talking about, who knew at this point what they'd run to a real franchise money spinner, and a lot of time and money has been invested into this. And I'd also refer you back to my review of Barbie Princess Charm School and my arguments around whether something can be of lesser quality because it's just a kids' film. And at the end of the day, given the title is High School Musical, we sort of have to look at the songs and the singing. And the more I've thought about High School Musical 2, and I have thought of it quite a lot since I watched it a couple of nights ago, is the film really feels like a showcase for the actors in the film. An early earworm of a number, by far, the easiest teenager to hate, in the form of Sharpay, sets the tone very on early. It fits the tone very early on here. We're here to watch beautiful people sing pop songs, which don't really think like they fall together into a single soundtrack, and that might well be due to the multiple songwriters we've got here. If you look at something like Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, the songs feel like a whole production. They all fall together, whereas these are just all over the place with plenty of different styles of music and singing. And the songs aren't great, they just kind of blend into the background. You're not going to go out afterwards desperately wanting to listen to one of the songs, which I understand a lot of people did with the first film. And how can I put this? The better songs out of it seem to have a strong influence from other better songs. There's a musical number that takes place over a baseball game that strongly reminded me of the Trace Adkins song Swing. And so much so, it's probably the closest attention I played to any of the songs, thinking, I know this music, I know this background vocals all sound very eerily like Swing. And in fairness, again, Kenny Ortega's choreography is really good, but the film feels like a showpiece for the singing and the dancing. And, in some ways, that's fine. If that's what you want, great, you're probably going to really enjoy this. But if you want a bit more meat on the bone, then High School Musical 2 probably isn't the one for you. And it's worth reminding ourselves that High School Musical 2 made a massive change to the Disney Channel. The original films that were being produced stopped being about coming-of-age stories for teenagers. They became vehicles for future pop stars. The year after High School Musical 2 came out, the Disney Channel released Camp Rock, which was a launch pad for the Jonas Brothers. 2 years later, 2009, we saw The Wizards of Waverly Place, which was a launch pad for Selena Gomez. And then 2011 was Ashley Tisdale's turn, as she got the spotlight all to herself in Sharpay's Fabulous Adventure, which, based on how the character is presented here, sounds like a 2-hour nightmare that I don't even want to contemplate. But High School Musical, in fairness to it, did introduce a lot of teenagers into musicals, which is no bad thing, since the genre has had its death and resurrection more than once. See, musicals coming to the big screen was sort of inevitable after talkies became a thing. And during the Great Depression, musicals really exploded. In 1930, Hollywood released 100 musicals. And it gave people an escape from the hardships of real life. Now, whilst the genre suffered its first major downturn during the Second World War, because films at the time tended to be more patriotic in nature, and what musicals were released had more of a twinge of sorrow about them. An example being, if we look at Meet Me in St. Louis. And there was also considerable issues that musicals had with the Hays Code. And the Hays Code we talked about when I reviewed Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. Musicals fell foul of the Hays Code because they were deemed to be too sexual, and therefore didn't adhere to the code. Now, musicals really started coming into their own at the peak of the studio system in Hollywood's golden age, and part of this was due to the roadshow. Now, a roadshow was trying to present a film more like a night at the theatre. You'd have your big tents, there would be an orchestra to provide the introduction, and then you paid a little bit extra, but I think the common theme at the time, and one of the Louis Mayer said something along the lines of, "Oh, people will be willing to pay an extra couple of dollars so they don't have to sit with the gum chewers." Now, you would often have a theatrical release after a film was premiered on a roadshow, and in 1961, West Side Story had a very large roadshow before its theatrical release, and it was very much going for giving people essentially a night at the theatre rather than a night at the cinema, which was deemed to be more prestigious. But like the rest of Hollywood at the time, the big Hollywood musicals started to collapse at the latter end of the 1950s. The threat obviously being television. Studio heads started to try to create films that would give a bigger, larger experience that until recently television couldn't help to replicate. And probably the most famous example of this was 20th Century Fox with Cleopatra, which damn near bankrupted the studio. The Hollywood musical did seem to be on the way out until along came Walt Disney in 1964, releasing Mary Poppins, which was a massive financial success. And whilst it only had a roadshow in London, the roadshow was so successful that it actually convinced Walt that he should go all in on the roadshow. Now, later that year, Mary Poppins was followed up by My Fair Lady, which replaced the strongest singer from who had originated the role on Broadway, which was Judy Andrews. Yes, Mary Poppins, Judy Andrews. And she was replaced with a stronger actress. And this was such a massive financial success that it actually completely reversed the disaster that 20th Century Fox had found themselves in because of Cleopatra. And then, just to top it all off, along came The Sound of Music, which cemented the return of the big Hollywood musical. And you can see similar success stories like this 1-2-3 punch with the musicals, with the 1-2-3 punch that came with Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man, which revitalized superhero films in the same way. However, unlike the success of the superhero films, rather than moving with the times, the studio system, which was on its way to a massive crash for this very reason, as we went into the 70s, because they wanted to stick with what they deemed to be safe projects. Now, musicals and westerns were always big money spinners for the studios, and with the musicals on such a meteoric rise following Mary Poppins, My Fair Lady, and The Sound of Music, suddenly everyone started making musicals, and the trend seemed to be taking a very popular music from Broadway or the West End and turning that into a big film, which is why we had the spectacular bomb that was an adaptation of Camelot. And original musicals that were being released weren't doing much better. Disney released The Happiest Millionaire, which is a Disney film that's so bad you've never heard of it. Paint Your Wagon was another phenomenally bad film. It was rushed out to capitalise on the success of musicals. And then the final painful death throes for the Hollywood musical came in the form of Rex Harrison's Dr. Dolittle and, of course, Hello, Dolly. There's a lot to go into as to why there was such problems with these two films. But suffice to say, Dolittle was massively over budget and was taken on the roadshow, equipped with massive amounts of merchandise that the producers said afterwards, this Dolittle has killed movie merchandise, when Star Wars was just around the corner. So we mighty spacemen of the future can look back at that and laugh. But at the same time, the price of roadshow tickets, which was already a little bit more than the average cinema ticket, was brought up from $2 to $6, which doesn't sound like much, but in today's money, that would be we're going from $17.60 to $52.80 in today's money. And some of you, like me, will possibly be listening to this thinking about the rise of 3D a few years ago when these films were coming out. Some filmed for 3D, like Dread, and others that were in no way whatsoever filmed for 3D, but it was tacked on afterwards, which is why we had terrible 3D effects with the re-release of The Clash of the Titans. And of course, they paid you had to pay a few extra quid in the UK to go and see these 3D films, and you gain very little of it. And that trend, thankfully, has slowly died away. In the meantime, I'd say gladly, because it was a pain for me, because I had to wear the glasses on top of my glasses. Now, equally, Hello Dolly was a Barbra Streisand vehicle that didn't have the devoted following of, say, My Fair Lady. And to be fair, Camelot had this problem as well. Hello Dolly didn't fit with the times. It's a 1950s themed, happy-go-lucky musical about the day-to-day life of New York suburbanites, released in the 70s, when the likes of Bonnie and Clyde and the French Connection was starting to come in, and the rise of the anti-hero. So it didn't fit with the times. Streisand was way too young for the role. It was massively over budget. It couldn't be released. It sat in limbo for a long time because it couldn't be released whilst Hello Dolly was doing strong financial business on Broadway. And eventually, Fox's deal with the Broadway production was broken for an additional $60,000, and an agreement that when the film was released, the ticket sales for Hello Dolly dipped, then the studio would make up that difference. So Hello Dolly really was the final blow for musicals, and after it, for a considerable amount of time, the musicals that were released were more counterculture in nature. So we had the likes of Cabaret and the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Now, I don't think High School Musical is entirely responsible for the resurrection of the musical genre, but it certainly helped with a younger audience. And without High School Musical, I wonder if we would have had the likes of Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog being able to be done. I wonder if Mamma Mia would have had the success it did with younger audiences. I mean, in conclusion, if you want just more singing and dancing from these actors and actresses, but you don't really care much about character development and plots, well, what little character development and plot there are in these films, then you might well enjoy the hell out of High School Musical 2. Now, personally, I found the songs really irritating and repetitive, the plot was dull as dishwater, the characters were either annoyingly stupid, annoyingly arrogant, or utter pricks. Now, there is, in fairness, there is a glimmer of interesting character development here with Sharpay's brother Ryan, who does seem to grow as a person during the film. But this little glimmer is buried under so much glitter and jumping, singing teenagers. By the time it comes around, you might just be a little too bored to care. I'm sure tweenagers will love it. Now, granted, saying tweens does still send a shiver up my spine, but rather than dig into that too deeply now, I've got to be honest, I have a review of Spider-Man 3 that's going to be full of apologies to write, and to be honest, it won't write itself. As explained last time, I've been drawing the reviews out, or rather Laura's been drawing the reviews out, before I complete these videos rather than me doing it live during the review, purely so I can burn my way through a few films and try and pick up the schedule of what I'm releasing. So the next film I now have watched and written my notes for, so I just need to record the review for The Usual Suspects. And then after that, the next one will be Spider-Man 3, which is going to be just full of apologies to Martin for defending the film for so much over the years. And then after that, we've got the animated film Ballerina, which is confusingly called Leap in some countries, which has thrown me when I was doing my research for it. So hopefully you will have The Usual Suspects on Wednesday, and I'll be back again next week for probably quite a long review, because there's a lot to cover when we talk about Spider-Man 3. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like the video, share it around, let people see what I'm doing. Hopefully we'll get a few more quid in, a few more reviews, and I'll keep making you laugh. Thanks for watching.